Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. This is a viewer's request video, and that is, what if Gerald Ford won re-election? So, fun fact, Ford never wanted to be president. He thought the vice presidency would be, a good way to retire. Then the whole Watergate thing happened, so he kind of got roped into being president. And so if he were to win, he would have to, do better at the debate. He won more states than Carter, so it shouldn't be that hard. Carter won less states than him and still won the election, so it shouldn't be that bad. He just needs to, do better, try to campaign a little bit better, actually try, because I don't think he actually tried all that much. He didn't want to be president in the first place. Gerald Ford would defeat Jimmy Carter 276 to 261, very narrow. I would expect Ford to barely win the popular vote, just barely, in this scenario. And, and everything that was wrong with Carter's term would be wrong with Gerald Ford's term. The Iranian hostage crisis, the energy crisis, there was another crisis that I'm forgetting, the oil crisis, there you go. There's a bunch of crises. All of that would be under the Ford administration. And going on to 1980, Ronald Reagan wouldn't run. He only ran because of what was going on, with the Carter administration. He knows when to run and when not to run. So Ronald Reagan would not be president in this timeline. In 1980, Kennedy would end up becoming the Democrat nominee, and George Bush, the CIA director, would become the Republican nominee, and Bush would get destroyed. Bush would do really well in Texas and California, which would, help him out, but not really, as Kennedy would pretty much win everything of the eastern side of the country besides 4 states, which was Indiana, Florida, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The only 4 states east of Texas he doesn't win, only states. Essentially winning in a landslide. I would expect him to win the popular vote by 8 points or more. Bush would not do well in debates either against Kennedy. Kennedy would pretty much walk all over him, which would not help his case. The economy is better, probably as good as the Reagan economy post-Carter, essentially. So Ted Kennedy is essentially the Ronald Reagan of this timeline, except there was no Iranian-Contra affair, so none of that happened, so which could lead to no 9/11. Could. And he runs again in 1984, and Republicans don't nominate a good candidate. They nominate Ben Fernandez, a ambassador, to, I think, Spain, if I'm not mistaken, and Kennedy ends up winning more of a landslide, 372. I'd expect him to win the popular vote by roughly 10 points, doing very well against Ben Fernandez, as he's just a throwaway candidate. You kind of can't beat Ben Fernandez. You kind of can't beat Ted Kennedy. He's very popular. Though he does, move away from the traditional means. The South is starting to become more and more red, which, is less Fernandez's fault, more the fact that people in the South aren't approved of Ted Kennedy as much as the people in the North, and a little bit of the West. So going on to 1988, Democrats nominate the first black or major presidential nominee in Jesse Jackson, and he nominates Paul Simon to be his running mate, and Pat Robertson becomes the nominee for the Republicans, and he chooses Paul Laxalt, the father of Adam Laxalt, to be his running mate, which is why Robertson ends up winning Nevada. Again, Jesse Jackson would end up beating Pat Robertson very easily. Not landslide, he'd win the popular vote by 5 points or more. With this, Texas flips back to being a blue state, mostly because of the black vote would help out Jesse Jackson in the state. Pat Robertson would appeal to more of a rural base in the South, which is why Jackson doesn't win Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. He doesn't win those states because of the whole rural turnout Robertson would bring out. In Jackson's term, it's not a bad term. A recession doesn't happen. Taxes are raised, but Jackson wouldn't be afraid to say, hey, I raised taxes. I'm not going to promise anything. I'm going to raise taxes, most likely. I don't see a recession happening. I really don't. Pat Buchanan would end up becoming the Republican nominee in 1992. And I think this will be a very close election. I see Jesse Jackson winning the popular vote by 2 points or more. Essentially, the modern Tea Party movement that happened in 2014 would happen in 1990. in 1990 instead of 2014, and where, the Republican Revolution, I guess you could say, occurs, and Pat Buchanan would be the one to lead said movement. Yeah, but I don't see Pat Buchanan winning, especially since there's not a recession. Jesse Jackson would be a very moderately popular president. Think Barack Obama. Uh, that's what Jesse Jackson is. He's essentially Barack Obama right now. Going on in 1996, Republicans still going on with the Tea Party. They go for a Tea Party activist in this timeline in Steve Forbes, who, uh, after 8 years of Democrat control, independents essentially would go for Steve Forbes over Bill Clinton because there's been 8 years of Democrat rule. They want change, rightfully so. So Steve Forbes ends up beating Bill Clinton just by technicality. He doesn't win the popular vote by much, just 1 pointer. So 1996. Also in this timeline, there's no NAFTA. Bill Clinton would propose NAFTA. Well, technically Jesse Jackson would propose NAFTA. Bill Clinton would support NAFTA. Steve Forbes would be against NAFTA. So there's no Ross Perot running this timeline because he would back Steve Forbes, though wouldn't help him much. Steve Forbes would be a very boring candidate. And he only wins by technicality, especially in the 2000 election, where Bill Bradley ends up becoming the Democrat nominee, who again supports NAFTA. Steve Forbes does not support NAFTA. And, both candidates very boring election cycle right here, as Steve Forbes would end up doing better popular vote by winning by 4 points, defeating Bill Bradley, who, very boring candidate. He would do better winning New Hampshire and Maine's 2nd District and the entirety of the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He would just do better, winning 323 to 214. Going on in 2004, 9/11 still happens despite there being no Iran-Contra affair. It's not too major. The Twin Towers are still there. It's just damaged very badly. Though in 2004, Ron Paul, a very anti-war message, John Kerry goes for, hey, we need war. We're very deferred here. Ron Paul's like, hey, we don't need war. And John Kerry's like, hey, we needed a payback, whatever. This is a 3-year debate. And whoever wins this election, essentially what's going to happen. Ron Paul would end up defeating John Kerry 82-57. John Kerry, very boring candidate. Ron Paul's like, hey, this is going to happen if we go to war, etc., etc. People believe him in this timeline. Though Florida does flip blue, just barely. Ron Paul has a pretty good presidency up into the housing bubble bursts in early 2008, early to mid 2008. And Democrats nominate a very popular senator, Barack Obama. And this time he's not running on a hope and change kind of thing. He's just saying, hey, Ron Paul, failed us. He failed us. And Barack Obama's not going on a war message, though he does get the country into the war in Afghanistan. So Saddam Hussein is assassinated about 4 years later in this timeline. So things are already very off track. Very much so. It's no landslide. Ron Paul would be able to handle himself better than John McCain did, definitely. So, but and Obama's not running on, hey, I'm going to be running to become the first black president, the second black president maybe, but not the first. And Barack Obama would defeat Ron Paul 297 to 241 to become the 43rd president. And Obama's first term is like his first term in real life, except this time he gets us into war within the Middle East. The war on terror begins with Barack Obama. And the second term, Newt Gingrich becomes the Republican nominee. Does a lot worse as Barack Obama essentially almost landslides and wins the popular vote by 6 points. Gingrich wouldn't be able to hold himself together like Mitt Romney would have, in my opinion. Romney was your very, establishment kind of guy, and the Tea Party's like, hey, we're not establishment at all. Even though they are a little bit at times. So Obama would defeat Gingrich, though Gingrich would do very well in the South besides Virginia and Florida. And going on in 2016, Martin O'Malley becomes the Democrat nominee. There is no Hillary Clinton in this timeline because there was no Bill Clinton as president, so Hillary would have no political platform to boost her up. No name recognition to help her get boosted up to become New York Senator or Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Instead, John Kerry would fill that position for all 8 years. And Martin O'Malley would be essentially become the front runner since nobody trusts Bernie Sanders yet. though Jim Webb does also become a major candidate this time around, though he still ends up endorsing Donald Trump, and I'll explain that a little bit later. Donald Trump does not run as a Republican. He stays as an independent because he doesn't agree with the moderate Democrats or the Tea Party activist Republicans, so he just ends up running as a neoliberal, neoconservative, you know, I don't care what party you identify me as, independent. He's essentially Ross Perot right now, essentially. Um, he chooses Charlie Crist, who is still an independent in this timeline, to try to possibly win the home state of Florida, though he's representing New York right now, so shush. Though the vote splitting between, he kind of vote splits on both sides. Some Democrats are going to vote for Donald Trump, but mostly it's going to be Republicans, and he kind of screws Ted Cruz out of a victory, possibly. As Martin O'Malley pretty much wins this election, 362 to 120 to 55. And Martin O'Malley does have a good first term up until the COVID-19 crisis happens, and essentially he loses. He loses to Congressman Joe Walsh, who, actually has a lot more name recognition, still is a congressman to this day, or up to this point, as he wins the Republican nomination. And, he wrote, his racist rhetoric on Twitter kind of halts him from winning any sort of landslide or anything, though he does end up beating Martin O'Malley by 276 to 262 to win re-election. Though the only problem here is that, he loses the popular vote by 3 points, and that has to do with the fact that, Martin O'Malley kind of wins Florida by the same margin Donald Trump did, as the Democrat Party still becomes the moderate party. They stay very moderate up to this point. Joe Walsh is essentially saying, hey, I'm pushing the party to the right of where we are now. So Republicans are the far-right party, while the Democrats are the moderate party. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm thinking of doing like a bonus episode of these what is, talking about 2024 and what I think could happen. If you guys would be down for that, tell me down in the comments below. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.